listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees and where you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. There'll be tears and laughter tonight, and perhaps both at the same time, in the extraordinary range of the guests that we have tonight on this compendium of international and national affairs, dealing with everything from the European Super League breakaway to the epic funeral of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. We'll be talking about coronavirus. We'll be talking about the big impressions that a top-class impressionist can make. We'll be talking about the war in Afghanistan, and we'll be talking about Julian Assange. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours, so fasten your seatbelts, because this is rock and roll radio with pictures. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. If you are in Washington, D.C., as Donald J. Trump used to be, and who knows, may one day be again, you can listen on FM, as he did on 105.5 FM. If you're in the rest of the United States, you can listen on AM, from coast to coast, from burning city to burning city. You can listen everywhere in the world, of course, on the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the 500,000 people every single week now without fail that watch as well as listen to the mother of all talk shows, please listen to this. If you are watching on Facebook, please right now share with all of your friends, all of your followers, all of your contacts, because big algorithm is still out to get us, constantly rampaging around amongst our audience, doing his best to squeeze it. But the best way to avoid that is popular power. And popular power means you, and it means you using that share button right now. You can watch on my own Facebook page, George Galloway. You can watch on RT's multiple Facebook pages. Ditto on YouTube, my own YouTube channel. If you're there, please subscribe. Or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, where, I don't know last week's figure, but every week for about 7 weeks, a new record audience was set. Maybe my friends will tell me what the Twitter viewership was this week. Truly phenomenal on clips, I must say. Perhaps a record number. Getting on for 200,000 clips viewed from last week's show. Astonishing. That's an audience that nobody else on British current affairs television can possibly aspire to. Just think about that. Imagine the audience we'd have if the mainstream media acknowledged our existence. But you can watch on Instagram also, you can watch on Twitch, you can watch on my Telegram channel, which is t.me/George Galloway. You can watch on the myriad of platforms, and you can feed back into the show, of course, through telephone calls. That's best of all, but you can also tweet me at George Galloway, at RTUK, and preferably both. Now, the funeral yesterday of His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who passed away a week previous at the age of 99, just a couple of months short of getting a telegram from his own wife, the Sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II. His remarkable life, which included fighting Nazis and fascists in the Far East and in the European Atlantic theatre of operations, spending 73 years walking a couple of paces behind the Queen of the United Kingdom, 73 years her consort, and most of that, almost all of it, as the consort to the head of state of Britain, being involved with 800 different charities, having a large family, not all of whom went on to please him, and generally being, as I said last week, a good egg, a good laugh, an authentic, down-to-earth man. His funeral was an epic of the genre. It was an epic success for Great Britain. It showed Great Britain in the best possible light, with one or two caveats that I shall go on to make. But the British proved again yesterday, and a global audience all over Europe, all over the North American subcontinent, all over parts of Africa and Asia, millions and millions of people watched it, and it showed that when it comes to pomp and ceremony, when it comes to the epic extravaganza of military and bands and dramatic backdrops, and unusually we even got a good day for it, the British are pretty hard to beat. It was a credit to everyone who was involved in the planning and the execution of the funeral. It was, for a sad occasion, actually, in parts, quite uplifting. It certainly, I think, worked wonders for the unity of the United Kingdom. You could tell that by the fact that the separatist leader, Nicola Sturgeon, was struck dumb on Twitter all day. You could tell that by the wailing and gnashing of teeth of sociopaths who couldn't allow a 99-year-old man's funeral to go by without venting their bile. It was a tremendous success. But I want to enter these two caveats. Why was the Queen forced to sit alone in the chapel at the funeral of her husband of 73 years? Why was she left bereft, alone? Why couldn't she be with her family? Why were there only 30 people at the funeral? I've just come down Regent Street. There were more people in the sock department of H&M than were allowed at the funeral of the consort of the Queen. What kind of madness is this? What kind of madness is it to force a 94-year-old lady to sit alone on such a harrowing occasion? Grief, she once said, is the price we pay for love. I could see that she was in grief. Might have been nice if she'd been able to squeeze the hand of her son, of her daughter, wouldn't it? And how many family members were not allowed to attend? When in Soho there are thousands of people sitting together in the street last night, getting roaring drunk, but only 30 people can go to a royal funeral. But it's very minimalism, stripped back, not bare, but stripped back from what it would have been in normal circumstances, was a credit to everyone involved, and not the least of whom was the lone piper, whose playing of the flowers of the forest, receding as he left the scene, will remain with me forever. I don't know what age he is, but after a long life, if he's still blowing that chanter, I hope he'll play at my funeral if I pass away when I'm 99, which is what I am currently planning to do. So farewell then, Prince Philip. You had a great innings, and nothing became you quite so much as your passing. Secondly, I want to talk about the end of the war in Afghanistan, if indeed it ends when Joe Biden says it will, although important caveats there too, on 9/11, don't you know, 2021. 20 years to the day after the Al-Qaeda Islamist fanatics delivered such a deadly, fatal blow to thousands of people in the United States of America. Joe Biden, whose party blocked Donald Trump from withdrawing American forces from Afghanistan, has announced that he is going to withdraw them any case. Now, he didn't mention that thousands of mercenaries, nowadays laughably known as contractors, will remain. But at least he had the grace not to put up a sign saying mission accomplished. Because if ever there was a mission that was not accomplished, it has to be this one. It cost the lives of an uncounted number of Afghans. They're only Afghans. Cost the lives of 2,400 American soldiers. And then there were British soldiers, Australian soldiers, of whom more later, New Zealand soldiers, Scandinavian soldiers, soldiers lost from a variety of countries that were part of the coalition assembled by George W. Bush to invade and occupy Afghanistan. Never, perhaps since the First World War itself, was so much blood spent for so little. The war, if it ends in 2021, will have lasted for 20 years and will have achieved precisely nothing. The people who were in power when it began 20 years ago will be back in power within a couple of weeks, if not more quickly, of the foreign forces departing. Absolutely nothing will have been achieved. Every soldier that gave their life there will have given their life in a war that achieved nothing. Nothing at all. How painful must that be for their families to know that their sons, brothers, husbands, fathers were sent into this crazy war, ill-clad, ill-armored, ill-armed, and on a totally bogus prospectus to give their life's blood in the sand in Afghanistan, like generation after generation after generation of invaders and occupiers, stretching back to Alexander the Great. And George Bush and Tony Blair were no Alexander the Great. No one, as I repeatedly said at the time, has successfully invaded and occupied Afghanistan. And that, I was certain, back in 2001, was not going to change. The truth is that the Taliban, who are the sons, maybe grandsons, of the Islamist fanatics, armed and financed and propagandized for by the United States and Great Britain in the 1980s, I will be back in power before you can say Jack Robinson. Although if you say Jack Robinson, they'll probably take you outside and cut your head off. This war, was it bloodier to go on or to go o'er? Who knows? It went on so long. The only purpose of continuing it was because we were already there. We're here because we were here. As the late Mr. Ben put it, eventually we'll be there because we have to guard the graves of those who fell here before us. An utterly absurd comic opera war, which would be laughable if it were not so utterly tragic for the soldiers of the invading armies, never mind the uncounted Afghans. In January of 2002, I was sat in the House of Commons listening to the then Foreign Secretary, the now discredited Chinese takeaway agent Jack Straw, when he uttered the words that could have come from a Gilbert and Sullivan spoof on the generals of the First World War. He promised in January of 2002 that our soldiers, I'm not making this up, would be home for Christmas. And I rose and warned Jack Straw that our troops will not be home 10 Christmases hence. He laughed. He invited the House to laugh. Oh, how they laughed. But they're not laughing now. Almost 20 Christmases hence. I hope the war ends on 9/11/2021. But I will never forgive the donkeys that led so many lions to their deaths and disfigurement on the plains and in the mountains of Afghanistan. Lastly, although I had intended to talk about other issues, perhaps I'll get the chance to do so later, I want to comment on the fact that on the 3rd of May, I have accepted an invitation from BBC Scotland for a 20-minute debate against Alex Salmond, my rival in the Scottish Parliament elections. As a matter of fact, Mr. Salmond has already agreed to an earlier debate at the end of this month, under the aegis of possibly the greatest living Scotsman, Andrew Neil, and Spectator TV. And so that's 2 debates between me and Alex Salmond before polling day on the 6th of May. But wait. The spokesman for Mr. Salmond said, and I quote, just 24 hours ago, Alex Salmond will not be debating George Galloway. If George Galloway turns up to such a debate, he will be debating himself. Now, I'm here to say to you that cannot possibly be true, because, first of all, I've accepted, and he's accepted, the first debate, and the second debate, well, that's a bit of a no-brainer. Which candidate's going to turn down 20 minutes of live political debate with me 3 days before polling day? That would mean that Mr. Salmond had become publicity shy, or else a coward. And that wouldn't be the Alex Salmond that I know, who is neither publicity shy nor a coward. So I'm expecting to see you, Mr. Salmond, at both of these debates. Or you've got some explaining to do. Not to me, not to BBC Scotland, but to the Scottish people, about why you are feared to debate separatism with me. Now, the truth is that Alex Salmond will have to turn up. Perhaps his seat in Holyrood will depend upon it. Perhaps mine will depend upon it. It's actually in Scotland's interest that the real deal, other beverages are available, are both in the Scottish Parliament. After all, there are precious few parliamentarians at Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament. I think there has to be room for two of us. See you at the debates, Alex. Won't I? It's going to be, I promise you, the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, here's my first poll of the evening, and in fact, it's one of the issues I ran out of time without being able to address. And it's this: which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? Now, that is difficult. A, John Major. B, Tony Blair. C, David Cameron. The proximate cause of this column is the Greensill scandal. A Mr. Lex Greensill, who was going to make David Cameron £30 million richer, which caused Mr. Cameron to brothel creep around the corridors of power in Westminster, pleading a special case for Mr. Lex Greensill. The fact that he was going to be paid £30 million was presumably, though one can't be sure, not mentioned, as meeting after meeting took place with the highest personages in the land. David Cameron can open doors, obviously. Barn doors, piggery doors, and the trough doors at Westminster. Mr. Greensill is at the pinnacle of what will become the biggest scandal of the 21st century so far. Let me be the first to tell you, if you do not know about the Ponzi scheme that he piloted before bankrupting a multi-billion-pound business built on the lending equivalent of subprime mortgages. A man who basically gamed the financial system and persuaded governments like the Scottish government in relation to Mr. Gupta. Remember his name, because the time will come not far distant when his name will be big, big, big indeed. Mr. Greensill has presided over, or what may become, a tumbling set of dominoes which may take down, like the banks in 2008, in the original subprime mortgage scandal, some household names. And one of those is David Cameron, whose name is now mud. He might as well be in the piggery, because no one with clean hands will want to touch him again. But here's the rub. It turns out that it's not just David Cameron who's been working for Mr. Greensill. Tony Blair is also on the payroll of Mr. Greensill. Well, where there's muck, there's brass. Where there's excrement, there's flies. And you haven't been able to keep Mr. Blair from flying in to such a mess anywhere else in the world. Why would you expect him to have avoided this one? I've just been sent a picture of Mr. Blair making the introductions for Mr. Greensill in Indonesia in a $25 billion proposed deal. I do hope the Indonesians didn't sign, because if they did, they're going to pay very dearly for it. Now, speaking of people who paid dearly, the world historic journalist and publisher Julian Assange has now completed 2 years in Belmarsh jail. He's being held in a maximum security jail, though he's actually not awaiting trial for anything. He's involved in an extradition attempt by the United States government. Not only is he an untried prisoner, therefore, he's an unaccused prisoner, wanted for no offence in Britain. Yet, as Peter Hitchens put it last week in the Daily Mail of all places, this maximum security calvary to which Assange has been subjected may very well be the cause of his untimely death. Richard Medhurst is one of the very few journalists and commentators that followed every day of the hearings involving Mr. Assange. He's a man with a vast social media following, and I'm very glad to say he joins us now. Richard, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Tell me this, first of all, what can you bring us about the current state of health, mental and physical, of the prisoner Julian Assange?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. Julian Assange, you know, we heard extensively during the extradition hearing at the Old Bailey that from numerous doctors that visited him while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy under arbitrary detention, while he was in Belmarsh prison, his mental health, his physical health have significantly deteriorated. We're talking about the top neuropsychiatrists in the world. They gave their expert testimony, and they were very clear on this, that if Julian Assange is extradited to the United States, there is a high risk of suicide. And, he's being persecuted and locked in a maximum security prison that's meant for Britain's worst murderers and al-Qaeda terrorists. And you have to consider he's been arbitrarily detained for the last decade, right? 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, 2 years now in Belmarsh prison. I mean, this is degrading, inhumane treatment, all because he exposed evidence of U.S. war crimes. They're trying to break him mentally and physically, and they're keeping him in solitary confinement. And he's not allowed to have visitors. He's deprived the comfort of his partner and his children. I mean, it's astonishing, right? This is happening in the middle of London, which is a supposedly liberal democracy, a society that upholds free speech, and this is how we're treating journalists.
Well, I hope the audience got that more clearly than me. It was out of sync in my ear. But just in case they did, and the producer-director hasn't cut us off, so I suppose it must be okay amongst the audience, Richard. It's precisely the danger of suicide and irreparable mental illness that caused the British court to throw out the American extradition application. Once that was thrown out, why is Assange still behind bars? He's been found by the British court not to be extradited. If the Americans want to appeal, why does he have to be held behind bars while they do?
That's a great question, because you might recall there was a Jordanian cleric, Abu Qatada, who is a member of Al-Qaeda. He was let out of the same prison, out of Belmarsh, on house arrest. He was allowed to live comfortably in a home paid for by the British taxpayer. But apparently a non-violent journalist who threatens US and UK imperialism is not afforded that same comfort. It's astonishing. And the United States, the extradition was blocked by Judge Baretzer specifically because of the health reasons. She cited the fact that US prisons are so horrible that the suicide risk would increase dramatically if he's sent there, and it's almost certain that he would be placed in administrative segregation, basically solitary confinement, both before and pre-trial and post-trial, when he's sent ultimately to ADX Colorado, which you go and you never see the sun again, as the warden said. And it's astonishing that she only decided to block the extradition on health grounds, because she basically agreed with the computer hacking charge and the 17 counts of espionage. She basically upheld the political nature of the indictment. This is shocking, because this indictment is essentially criminalizing journalism in the US and the UK, and the US is imposing its laws on the UK, and she okayed that. She agreed with that, and it's absolutely astonishing that this is happening. That the judiciary has been hijacked by the United States, and of course Joe Biden. He's lodging the appeal and continuing Trump and Pompeo's work.
So finally, Richard, because this is a bit of an Andy Warhol interview for me, because I'm actually hearing you 6 times simultaneously, or rather just not simultaneously. So my last question, when will the end of this be in sight? For how long are they going to keep a man not only not guilty of any crime in Britain, but actually not even accused of any crime in Britain in these dastardly conditions? Go ahead.
Well, as long as they can. I mean, we've seen from leaked documents that it's part of their plan to just keep on persecuting him, having him jump through appeals and court proceedings. For decades, if that's what it takes. This is what the United States does to people who challenge its imperialism. This is what the United States is trying to do. It's trying to make an example out of Julian Assange, that if you expose our crimes, we are going to persecute you until we'll chase you until the earth's end. And right now we're waiting for the appeals process to continue, because the United States wants to appeal the judge's decision not to extradite, and Assange's defense is considering lodging a cross appeal to counter the espionage and hacking charges which were upheld by the judge. And I mean, this is just incorrigible, right? That we have Tony Blair, we have George Bush, we have Jack Straw, Blunkett, Rumsfeld, all these vile criminals that are walking free, and who started these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, a journalist who exposed their crimes, videos of Apache gunships gunning down Iraqi civilians, CIA torture and rendition, kidnapping innocent people in Europe with the help of European governments. The person who exposed that is the only one who's seen the inside of a jail cell. It's absolutely, it's heinous.
Well, this is a point I made myself in a speech more or less a year ago, Richard. I'll say goodnight to you now, but I hope you managed to catch this, if indeed you weren't there in the audience at the time. Richard Medhurst, thank you very much indeed for joining us. This was my speech, which someone else has cleverly put some music to and trimmed a little bit. It's quite dramatic, I hope you'll find. Who cannot tremble with indignation at the idea that the man that blew the whistle on the war crimes is in Belmarsh and the war criminals are on the BBC and ITV and raking in millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds? The criminals have made it a crime to report on the crimes that they committed. Ponder that. That's now the country that we are living in. This man, who should be in Oslo getting the Nobel Peace Prize, was being stripped and searched by goons, handcuffed, held in 5 different cells in one day, handcuffed 11 times. Handcuffed for what? He was in a bulletproof box all day in the court. What were they searching him up his backside for? Why did they take his legal papers away? Talk about an abuse of process. This is an obscenity in a country that pretends to believe in the rule of law and justice. They spied on every legal meeting that Julian had with his representatives in absolute brazen defiance of the rules of justice. And this kind of abuse of process was unveiled by the defense. The case would be thrown out immediately. No trial can take place when it's been corrupted from the beginning. Who cannot tremble with indignation? Well, 95% at least of Britain's journalists didn't even show up today to hear the defence's argument. 95% of Britain's broadcasters are not trembling with indignation. If you cannot tremble with indignation at any injustice anywhere, you are not a human being. You have no pulse and you have no soul. And that's the reality of the so-called fourth estate in this country. Well, thank you to Soapbox. I have no idea who did that, but they kind of improved it. I hope that you thought that was worthwhile. Which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? Well, John Major comes in at 4%. David Cameron at a substantial 23%. But running away with the race is Tony Blair. 73% of the audience think that Tony Blair is the sleaziest former British Prime Minister in all history. I don't know how much money Tony Blair has made, but in the Bible, it's asked, what shall it profit a man if he shall gaineth the whole world, but loseth his own soul? I can think of no man to whom those words could be more appositely addressed than the Right Honourable Tony Blair. You can vote, a lot of people are, you can vote on my Twitter feed. Which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? A. John Major, B. Tony Blair, C. David Cameron. And Cameron's trailing by 2/3 Tony Blair. despite being in the eye of the Greensill storm, which just goes to show two things. First of all, most people haven't really cottoned on to what the Greensill scandal is going to turn out like. And secondly, Tony Blair is just so bad. Okay, Ricky says absolutely has to be Theresa May. Why? What was sleazy about Theresa May? Johnny says Blair, easily. Gordon says the first two are equal, that's Major and Blair, but Blair takes it for an illegal war. And Noel says Tony Blair took the United Kingdom into a war on false premise, costing hundreds of thousands of lives. Surely the outright winner. And Joanne says this was so hard. I had to go for Blair in the end because it was a tie between him and Cameron on the sleaze. But because of the illegal war, I went for Blair. Tony says not only did Blair set the Middle East ablaze with his best chum, George W., he then made millions as an ex-PM in advisory fees to some of the worst regimes. And Daniel says Tony Blair is the longest-serving Prime Minister with the largest majorities each time. So he's on that list for a reason. He could explain things properly with charisma. Nigel says that's some choice. There should be a button for all of the above. And John says Blair, he has destroyed the fabric of this country with his immigration policy. And Max says David Cameron, definitely the slimiest and sleaziest. Blair just downright evil. John Major was just the grey man who liked eating peas. And tucking his shirt into his underpants and making the beast with two backs with Edwina Currie. I suppose none of that counts as sleaze nowadays. Now, quite the funniest man that I have ever met in person, and I've met quite a few funny men, is my next guest. Lewis McCloud is an actor and an impressionist. He made a big impression on me. Let's see how he does with you. Lewis McCloud, very welcome on to the mother of all talk shows. It's been too long. It's great to see you again. There was a golden age of impressionists, you know, Rory Bremner's period and so on, but has the practice fallen slightly out of the zeitgeist? What's your take on that? Are you getting plenty of work?
I'm getting plenty of work thanks to you, Gigi, with that incredible voice that you have, where you can shout to the heavens and then come down to this part here, which is wonderful. You are an impressionist's dream, Gigi, with your platitudes. I love it. Yeah, there's loads.
Platitudes? I'll platitudes you.
It's wonderful to speak to you, Gigi, yet again. It's just great. The shows that we do, like Dead Ringers, we rely on the writers, and that allows us to focus on the voice that we're doing that week. And of course, it changes, and they're always looking for new characters. And I think that's the sad thing now, that there's just not enough. There's not enough characters like yourself. I mean, if you look at you know, I mean, as I say, you could write sketches around. You're great in a sketch, however the caricature is, and I'm sure you've heard many of them, and you've got a great sense of humour to be able to have me on and be impersonating you. A lot of them don't like it, you know, but and people like, you know, you've got Nigel, you know, no, let me speak, you know, that was one of the things about Nigel, is I sort of made a rod for my own back with him, because, of course, he speaks so quickly, and he sort of laughs as he's talking, and, you know, so whenever I was reading a script from Nigel, it was always about 200 miles an hour, so I couldn't even keep up with with my own impersonation of him. But
and he's chucked it now, Lewis.
What's that?
He's chucked it now. He's out of politics. You're right. I mean, the big characters are fading away.
Yeah, I mean, there's... Well, you know, we've got two Boris Johnsons on Dead Ringers. We've got John Culshaw, who impersonates good Boris, and then you have me doing the wah-wah-hee-hee-wah. I'd like to say, what? Joculants. I want an award for services to Scotland. I mean, I've got a great team Look at me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, politician of the year being 1802. Pwah! With the exception, you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, that sort of thing that he does. Again, you can mimic him. There's just not very many others. Keir Starmer was quite difficult to do.
Well, he's a block of wood. How do you impersonate a block of wood?
I know. Well, and Corbyn was difficult, but the hardest one of them all was Cameron. And I know Rory Bremner well, and John Culshaw and I obviously worked together a lot, and we were all going, oh yeah, Cameron. And Duncan Wisby, who's brilliant on Dead Ringers, he got the voice down on that, but he was a hard one to do. And so it depends if there's something that we can capture in their voice, you go for that. But really, it's thin on the ground at the moment. There's no.
Well, speaking of thin on the ground, what about Big Alex Salmond? Can you do him?
Well, do you know, actually, I'll be honest with you, that if he doesn't say with, he says with. I've got to be honest with you there, George. I heard you earlier wanting to. The gauntlet has been thrown down, and I would look forward to a debate with you. I actually did Trump last night. I've got the full wig on for a thing that they were doing, entertaining as Trump. This is what happens, you see, because I've got so many friends that are curious to know, well, what side are you going to be on? And of course, being in Scotland now, thanks to the pandemic, I'm sort of immersed in this kind of the world. The political debate goes on, and being in London, you've got ringers, and then there's Spitting Image. It came back, but Salmond, we did him on Newsoids. He actually had a puppet of him. And he was another great character. We used to do him a week in a sing-song every time he spoke. Oh, there we go. But I can't wait to see you and he together. I mean, Gigi, that's going to be...
That's going to be a heavyweight championship, definitely.
Oh, it will. And Andrew Neil, come on. I mean, he was another one. See, he's Andrew Neil. I did him on his show. He's got an elephant's eye, Gigi. He looks at you like that, And we were sitting opposite, and there was forgive me, I can't remember her name, but they queued up a VT, and while it was on, he clocked me in the corner because she was going across the seat going, do his voice. And they did this thing. He came out of the item. He must have only had about 40 seconds, managed to do the calculation that we could get this voice on, and went, okay, let's hear it.
Very good. Now, listen, Lewis, there's a very big American audience right now listening and watching. It would be remiss not to do Trump because they're all missing him. Whether they loved him or hated him, they're certainly missing him.
I'm born on the 4th of July, Gigi, and I've got, a strong affinity with America. I love them very much. My cousins, my cousin Heather Menzies Urick, she was in The Sound of Music. She played Louisa. God rest her. She passed away and married Robert Urick, who was Dan Tana in Vegas, Spencer for Hire. So I was going over to the States, and that life, I just loved being around them. But the political side of it, oddly, I sort of found myself impersonating.
It started with I got Bill. I did not.
Then it became George W. There is no such word in France as entrepreneur. Then we had Obama. We are fighting the flames of despair with the cooling waters of hope and courage, fanned by the winds of truth.
And then you've got the Donald, and it's a very thank you for I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McCloud. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. Now I've got a massive handicap. I wear my pubic hair on my head, but I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap? I mean, come on. Who knows where I'm going to go in Scotland? I might come over and buy up some more land, Wind turbines, Alec.
But is Joe Biden just too boring to do?
Well, the thing about Biden is it takes a while for them to bed in, George. And, you've got this thing about the Enbridge 3.
That's scary. I mean, that's going to go off.
It's the pipeline. But it's difficult to find something that you can hang your hat on with him, Apart from the way he walks, the voice takes a while to bed in, and it's just, as you say, you can't, where am I? What day is it today? There's a little bit of that going on.
There's something about Trump. When he was, I used to do his voice, and I think I sounded more like oddly like Alec Baldwin in the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. I sort of did him. Says, you're talking about what? You're bitching about that sale you shot? You know, but then, of course, when he sat down and he did an interview with, you know, Barbara Walters, and he started talking very sincerely, I'm the only guy for the job. I realized, I thought, oh, wait a minute, if he wins this is the guy that we're going to see more of. He's going to be the quiet, sincere Trump. And I thought, I could give this a go. Because the stadium guy, it's like he's got another set of pipes. He's got another voice. It's a big voice. But when he's talking sincerely, you know, it's a much easier for me. It just slotted into that note a little easier for me, so I could do him, you know. And it's just been there. But hey, he's going to come back, isn't he? I mean, it's not.
Oh, for sure. Unless they shoot him, he'll be back. I've got no doubt about that. Now, you mentioned Spitting Image having been back.
Yeah.
It wasn't a rip-roaring success. I was quite friendly with the guy that did it, Matt Ford, so I hate to say this, but and I didn't actually see much of it, but it got pretty poor reviews. What did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was good. I mean, I thought beautifully filmed. The writing was good. I think because BritBox is yet another platform to play these shows, and it's like, you know, was it just one too many platforms for it to come on? I mean, I think from what I heard, and the figures are the holy grail for that, Gigi, as you know, it stormed it on YouTube.
Oh, did it?
I mean, the figures were great, but I think, you know, there were. I looked at the thread. These things they're kind of arbitrary, as you know, but the reviews for it I saw were good. I mean, there was an enthusiasm for it coming back.
Definitely.
I've been part of that iteration, that, you know, the new Spitting Image now 3 times, so there's a sort of hiatus of maybe 5 to 8 years, and then they bring it back, and they actually brought back Spitting Image, so of course the press were all over it. And I suppose it's that thing, you know, it's like the Star Wars franchise coming back. There's going to be real scrutineers wanting to see if it's going to meet up to the standard of what happened in the 80s and 90s with the show. But I think they did a really good job of it. I think it worked. I would have loved to have gotten Trump and wow, Boris, because I was playing them on Dead Ringers, you know, and there were a few people that said, oh, well, you know, we like your Trump. But it's a subjective thing anyway. There is as many people say, well, we like the other guy doing it, or whoever it is that's playing them. And
I've never met anybody that could do it like you. You say you've got plenty of work. How? I mean, can people book you for weddings and funerals and bar mitzvahs and so on?
I mean, I was a sort of latecomer to the whole corporate thing, because there's the master Rory doing it, you know, and Rory's fantastic, but it was a slow burn for me at the start, and then it started to become really busy doing Trump, because I got this phenomenal wig from a company called Alex Rouse, who do, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch and period dramas and things like that. And so I've now got a head bust on a shelf. Wow. This wig is sensational. And so when I put the whole thing on, I was, geez, in profile, I really looked like him. And I slowly started getting bookings in this, you know, from the Dorchester to the Hydro up the road, you know. So
well, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you're busy. Oh, there it is there. Look, www.lewismcloud.com. If you've got a few bob, and he's not cheap. He was cheap tonight, but generally speaking, he's not cheap. Please book him. He's absolutely the funniest guy I've ever met. The time I've spent in his company has been time with tears rolling down my cheeks, I must say.
Yeah, that's very kind. You know, I've still got memories of the Speak Up that we managed to get you through BBC Alba, which Alec now owns. But or Alapa, BBC Alapa. There's a lot of people call me a right Alapa, but however, I wanted to know.
There's a point. Well, not to put too fine a point on it. You are a chuchter. How do you pronounce Alba?
Well, you know,
Donald Trump thought Alba made vintage radios in the UK. You know, it's a very strange thing. But
I'm told it's Alapa.
Oh, yeah?
I think that's the, you know, hey, listen, my Gallic's not great. You know, Cod, Mile and Faulty, I thought were in Bananarama. I mean, I'm told it's Alapa. But...
who knows? I just wait with bated breath to hear your pronunciation of Alapa when you sit for a square go with Alec.
All ladies beware, apparently, it's an acronym for. But what would I know about that? Lewis McCloud, actor and impressionist extraordinaire. Thank you for this delight on the Mother of All Talk Shows this evening. God bless you.
Great to be on your show. Thank you.
Very, very nice to see you again. Now, I hope you liked that as much as I did. Which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? A, John Major, 4% just. B, Tony Blair, 73%. David Cameron, 23%. 1,565 votes in. You've got an hour left still to get your vote in. Now, while I dry my eyes during the news, I'll be preparing for a quite extraordinary guest. Major David McBride is the Australian whistleblower and former British Army Major and Australian Army lawyer who from 2014 to 16 made information, the Afghan files, on war crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan available to ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. They broadcast the details in 2017. And Major McBride's trial, not the trial of the people he alleged committed the war crimes, his trial is planned for May. McBride made internal allegations of war crimes committed by Australian forces in Afghanistan, then subsequently supplied information about these allegations to the television company, which is the equivalent of the BBC, except the BBC here in Britain would never have broadcast the material. But the result of the brouhaha was that Major General Justice Paul Brereton began an inquiry which found, quote, credible information that war crimes were committed by Australians in Afghanistan. But, shoot the messenger, if you will, Major McBride was charged with the theft of Commonwealth property and then charged with a further 4 offences of breaching the Defence Act of 1903 and another of unlawfully disclosing a Commonwealth document contrary to the Crimes Act of 1914, an auspicious year. As of November 2020, Major McBride, who pleaded not guilty to each of the charges at a preliminary hearing, is awaiting trial. He has a top-class legal team. They'll find it hard to convict him, in my view, especially as they don't seem to be in a hurry to convict the people that he credibly accused of committing war crimes. So he's up, Major David McBride, after the news. And, of course, we will have, as always, in the final hour, our own Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. But first, let's get the news slightly early with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The funeral yesterday of the Duke of Edinburgh was watched by more than 13 million television viewers in the UK, overnight figures show. The 1-hour service was viewed by 11 million people on the BBC and 2.1 million on ITV and around 450,000 on Sky. As well as television coverage, the Windsor service was broadcast on radio and several YouTube channels. Figures for the royal family's YouTube live stream were not available, but it was third on YouTube's worldwide trending list today. In 2002, more than 10 million watched the funeral of the Queen Mother in the UK, although that ceremony was held on a Tuesday. In 1997, the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, was watched by 31 million people, a record audience figure. A small helicopter is set to be the first to fly on another planet. Ingenuity is a 1.8 kilogram helicopter that travelled to Mars inside NASA's Perseverance rover, which landed in February. NASA say it's now aiming to test it tomorrow, but admits that it may not be successful, in which case they'll try again later in the week. A wildfire is raging out of control on the slopes of Table Mountain above the city of Cape Town, South African authorities say. The blaze has destroyed a part of a cafe at the Rhodes Memorial overlooking the city's port, and hundreds of students have been evacuated from a nearby University of Cape Town campus. The fire is moving towards the campus, the Western Cape government said. 3 helicopters are waterbombing the flames. Firefighters were first alerted at 8:45 local time. Local Environment Chief Anton Brodell said the situation was serious and the wind was picking up, which he said was a cause for concern. Health officials in Britain are looking at whether a new Indian COVID strain spreads more easily and evades vaccines. There's not yet enough data to classify it as a variant of concern, a leading scientist has said, but Dr. Susan Hopkins of Public Health England said some cases had been found in the UK that were not linked to travel, with the origin now being investigated. More than 70 cases have been identified in England and Scotland. It is also too soon to decide if India should be put on the government's travel red list, Hopkins said. The government will examine suggestions to improve lobbying rules after a series of inquiries, the Environment Secretary has pledged. George Eustice said current systems were, quote, quite robust, but it was possible that they could be, quote, tweaked or improved. He said former Prime Minister David Cameron's actions were acceptable when he lobbied ministers on behalf of the collapsing finance firm Greensill Capital. But Labour said the row over the ex-PM's work had eroded trust in politics. A government review and 3 separate MP-led inquiries are now looking into Cameron's attempts to lobby ministers on behalf of Greensill. His work for the firm, which collapsed in March, has prompted increased scrutiny of private companies' attempts to influence ministers and officials. Cameron began working as an advisor to Greensill in August 2018, just over 2 years after he stood down as Prime Minister in July 2016. Syria is to hold a presidential election next month, a move likely to maintain President Bashar al-Assad's grip on power. Assad is not expected to face serious opposition, despite continuing conflict and a growing economic crisis. After 10 years of war, the Syrian government controls most of the big population centres in the country. Across the decade, about 400,000 people have been killed and over half of Syrians displaced. The election for a president who will serve a 7-year term will take place on the 26th of May. Plans for a new and breakaway European Super Football League are expected to be announced later tonight. 6 English teams are thought to be involved, including Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal and Chelsea. Other teams are thought to include Barcelona, Juventus and Real Madrid. The project is being launched to rival UEFA's Championship League format, which currently dominates European football. However, the Premier League's chief executive, Richard Masters, has written to all of the 20 league teams stating opposition to the new project. It's understood that the American bank JP Morgan is investing some $6 billion in the project. The billionaire Issa brothers, who own Asda, have bought the British food chain Leon. More than 70 Leon restaurants across the UK and Europe have been sold to the brothers' giant petrol forecourt business, EG Group. The deal includes 42 company-owned restaurants as well as 29 franchise sites, which are mainly found in airports and train stations across the UK and a handful of European countries such as the Netherlands and Spain. And finally, the iceberg that was for a time the biggest in the world is no more. A68, as it was known, covered an area of nearly 2,300 square miles when it broke away from Antarctica in 2017. That's equal to a quarter of the size of Wales. But satellite images show that the megaberg has now virtually gone, broken into countless small fragments that the US National Ice Center says are no longer worth tracking. A68 broke from the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, and for a year it had hardly moved, but then it started to drift north with increasing speed, riding on strong currents and winds. The billion-ton block took a familiar route, spinning out into the South Atlantic towards the British Overseas Territory of South Georgia. The small island is where many of the biggest icebergs go to die. Caught in the local shallows, they are doomed to gradually melt Later here on Sputnik News, I'm Jamie
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, as I said earlier, according to President Biden, if he remembers what he said, the war in Afghanistan is about to come to an end 20 years after it began. Now, veritas is usually the ultimate defense when accused of something, though try telling that to Julian Assange. But when you make allegations which are then found to have been true, you would have thought that you might get an award, maybe a medal, rather than a charge. But that's not, of course, what's happened to Major David McBride. Having successfully blown the whistle on Australian Army war crimes in Afghanistan, those allegations having been investigated and found to be well-founded, Major McBride is facing trial next month, and we're lucky that he's found the time between preparing for his defence to appear tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Major David McBride, thank you very much for joining us. Kindly, for those on this side of the world who perhaps didn't follow as closely as I did, the allegations that you made, summarize what it was that you blew the whistle on, please.
Well, George, in 2012 mainly, probably before that as well, there was a campaign of murder, extreme violence, by some, very few, but by some key members of the Special Forces. I believe that the senior leadership of the Australian Defence Force found out about this campaign, and I think from that point onwards, they tried to cover it up, and they tried to cover it up by doing a lot of sham trials on things that weren't worthy of a trial in order to distract from these series of murders that were carried out simply to terrorise the population. And what's most embarrassing of all, carried out by decorated and famous soldiers. I believe that what it was a cover-up from pretty much from the very beginning, when the leaders of the military, and probably some of the politicians as well, knew they were badly exposed to something that could blow up in their face, and that people that they'd pinned the most serious medals on were actually psychopathic killers and with no concern for the law, and that it was going to affect our national reputation, not just the matter of, a few soldiers who'd got sort of overheated in battle, but this was something far more sinister than that.
Yes, I followed your allegations closely. The fact that the miscreants or criminals were crack soldiers from the special forces of the Australian Army, and as you said, were highly decorated soldiers, made the whole thing very much worse. As you inferred there, this was not in the heat of battle, someone going just too far. This was systematic. It was a kind of initiation, rituals, blooding of soldiers by killing an Afghan, any Afghan. Bring me the head of an Afghan.
Yeah, I think that was it. And it was a matter of, they had an expression for it going up the Congo, where, you decided we couldn't beat the Taliban on normal grounds. So the idea was if we just killed indiscriminately, the Afghan people would fear us more than they feared the Taliban. Now, needless to say, it wasn't a very good plan, and the Afghan people who came in contact with these 2 or 3 patrols hated us, and many of their sons ended up joining the Taliban and are still in the Taliban now. So it was a stupid plan. But yes, it was a plan. It wasn't a mistake. And the embarrassing thing for the Australian military leadership is that these were the very people that they pinned medals on repeatedly. These were the very people who they were lauding as heroes. And it was actually some of the sort of unsung heroes also of the Special Air Service that said, this is wrong. But of course, the very big egos and the very strong personalities, they were anyone that spoke out against this sinister policy was in fear of their own life from their own soldiers. So the story is pretty disgusting.
There's something of Kurz and the Apocalypse Now kind of bathed in blood feel about all of it, David.
Yeah, there is. There's definitely some of that Apocalypse Now story. It's like life imitating art. They thought that it was clever. And I think what was most embarrassing for the government, it was the fact that the key people involved had medals pinned on them by the Prime Minister, the Governor General. They spoke very well on TV. They were selected to do interviews. So it was like your star football player in your big team who turns out to be, involved in a bribery scandal. I was really whistleblowing on the leadership. I think the leadership knew. I think they were so disgusting that they were prepared to throw innocent soldiers under the bus in order to take attention away from the really big elephant in the room. And I found that most disgusting of all. If people sign on and they do the right thing, and they put their lives on the line for the country, and they don't deserve to be sacrificed in order to protect the reputations of generals and undeserved heroism of people who are actually psychopaths.
Now, in a normal society, and I don't just mean in terms of Australia, although I do include Australia, in a normal society, you would be lauded. You would have laurel leaves placed around your head for the signal public service that you did. But that's not what's happened, is it?
No, and that won't be a surprise to you and some of your viewers, although it was a surprise to me. As I said, I'm as a true believer. I had a very kind of blue blood background. I went to Oxford University. I went to Sandhurst. I thought that someone would pat me on the back quite early and say, good on you for picking this up, but they didn't. And it shows you that our societies are kind of sicker than we thought, well, sicker than I thought, because I had real trouble getting anybody interested in this story. It was the end of my career. I almost committed suicide. I spent years in the wilderness. No one wanted to know. I was backgrounded by the Defence Force. It was very tough. In fact, I actually wanted to get arrested in the end because I thought my last card in the deck would be to be in front of a judge or a jury and then all the public relation machine that it was against me could be stripped away, and I could, even though I was the defendant, I could call some of the generals and politicians and ask them the question, did you know about the war crimes in 2012? And without their spin doctors and without their paid media consultants, to see them squirm while a judge looks on. There's few places that can happen, and a court of law, a serious court of law, is one of the few. So it's a kind of high-risk strategy for me But the only way that justice is going to happen is if we have a court case and some people, very senior people in Australia, have to answer some hard questions.
And what might happen to you in the worst case?
Lifetime imprisonment, yeah. That's the worst case, but it's possible. So it's a high risk strategy. But I believe I believe in this cause so strongly. I'm prepared to do that. If they can get away with this, the Western democracies are on a trajectory to ruin. If we're not already the bad guys of the world, we will be soon. And people need to stand up. I'm lucky. I'm in a position. I saw all the sort of classified documents. I'm an educated person. I've got all the right training. And if I don't stand up, no one else has got any chance. But I need to stand up and I need to, man the wall. And hopefully we can turn the trajectory back where people start being honest. As you said it in the beginning in the introduction, the truth. We need to value the truth. And if we've made mistakes, we need to admit it. But we're certainly only going to make matters worse for ourselves if we keep lying about what our soldiers and what our governments are doing and saying, oh, it's all right, we're the good guys, we can lie about this, we can lie about that. The Australian government, and I think the British government, the US government, are now increasingly run like they're corporations selling Coca-Cola, where the truth is not even relevant. You've got sales, you've got losses, you've got new branding, you've got advertising, but the idea that some major has found out about terrible killings, that was of no interest to them. I want to change that where the truth matters.
Well, you're a hero to me, Major, and I suspect to the worldwide audience that you've been speaking to this evening. I wish you very well in the trial. We'll be following it closely. And if you manage to break free, I hope to host you here in London at some point in the future. Thanks very much indeed for joining us with that most powerful testimony. Major David McBride, thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. God bless you. Which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? It's still Tony Blair. In fact, he's going up. David Cameron's going down. He's at 22. Blair's at 74. John Major is at 4. Is there any record that Tony Blair will not be able to capture? Let me take a 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
Well, that was powerful. So let me issue a call, a challenge now to Alex Salmond. I challenge Alex Salmond to a head-to-head debate on independence, separatism, versus my plan for remaining within Britain and fighting for a new Britain. And I think that would be big box office, as John McTernan put it. I don't know why a broadcaster's not biting my hand off for that proposal. But one thing is clear. You can refuse to refer to the elephants in the room, but that doesn't mean the elephants are not in the room. That doesn't mean the people can't see and feel the presence of the elephants. And the elephants in this contest are Alex Salmond and me. Separatism versus unionism. Let's get it on, Alec. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who would be happy to film it.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
I did tell you there'd be tears and laughter in tonight's show. What a powerful interview with Major David McBride. I think that one will travel far. But this is where I look back at 7 days in our past, which mark our history, and in some cases the present, maybe even the future. This is the week. On this day in 1955, the legendary rocket scientist Albert Einstein, perhaps the cleverest man who ever lived, died in hospital in Princeton, New Jersey, aged 76. The originator of the theory of relativity had been admitted to hospital 3 days earlier with an internal complaint. After his death, and this is the grisly bit, Einstein's brain was removed and preserved for scientific research by Canadian scientists. It was found that the part of his brain responsible for mathematical thought and the ability to think in terms of space and movement was 15% wider than average. It was from the sublime to the ridiculous also the day in 1985 when Wham! Became the first Western pop act to release an album in China. It was called Make It Big, no double entendre intended, and they sure did. It followed their groundbreaking 10-day visit to China a month earlier, also the first by a Western pop group. In 1770, the British explorer, as they called them those times, Captain James Cook, first spotted what was to be called Australia. 10 days later, on April 29th, he landed at Botany Bay with some of his crew, where they shot and wounded an original Australian. Says here an Aborigine, which just actually means an original Australian, which provoked a volley of spears from the locals, as you would expect, an inauspicious and violent beginning to the relationship between the two countries. In this week, in 1993, on the 19th of April, the Waco siege ended in flames and carnage. 76 members of the Branch Davidian sect, including 25 children, died at the besieged headquarters, including the leader, David Koresh. He and others were found to have died of gunshot wounds. The siege by armed federal agents, including the FBI, ended after 51 days when they attacked the headquarters with fatal consequences. A huge car bomb exploded at a government building in Oklahoma City exactly 2 years later to the day, in 1995, killing 168 people, including 19 children at the nursery. More than 500 others were injured. Timothy McVeigh, a 33-year-old Gulf War veteran, was convicted of the attack and sentenced to death by lethal injection after a 2-month trial. He was executed at Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana on the 11th of June 2001. The motive for the attack was retaliation against the US government for the bloody end to the Waco siege. I saw the movie of that siege. It's really very well worth seeing, an extraordinary story. Anyway, Fidel Castro resigned as first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba in 2011 after holding the title for a mere 45 years. As a matter of fact, this very weekend, Raul Castro steps down as the first secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, meaning that for the first time, no Castro will hold office in the Communist Party. Now, I remember the hundreds of hours that I spent in the company of Fidel Castro, in which we discussed many things. I did mention to him that his own children were nowhere to be seen on the political scene. You didn't become somebody in Cuba just because your father was somebody. In fact, in the apartment block in which I was living in Cuba while writing my book, the Fidel Castro Handbook, available from just one good bookshop, my shop, georgegalloway.shop, in the very apartment building in which I was staying, the son of Che Guevara was also living in relatively insalubrious surroundings and earning $30 a month, just like everybody else in the civil service. Not only was he Che Guevara's son, he looked a spitting image of Che Guevara, and yet virtually nobody in the world knows that he exists because, as I said, the son of Che Guevara isn't someone because he's Che Guevara's son, any more than the son of Fidel Castro was. But the two leaders of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel and his brother Raul, have now both gone. In 1920, the piece of paper which changed history and whose effects still influence world events today, the Balfour Declaration, was recognized by the League of Nations, formed 3 months earlier, and Palestine was made a British mandate. In 1968, Enoch Powell, then the Tory Shadow Defence Secretary, gave his Rivers of Blood speech attacking the Labour government's immigration policy. Addressing a Conservative Association meeting in Birmingham, in front of cameras and media which he had himself summoned, Powell said Britain had to be mad to allow in 50,000 dependents of immigrants each year. Powell compared enacting legislation such as the Race Relations Bill to throwing a match onto gunpowder. He said that as he looked to the future, he was filled with a sense of foreboding. Like the Roman, I seemed to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood, he said. Actually, that speech destroyed the political career of Enoch Powell, who might in other circumstances have made it right to the very top. One has to assume that it was a calculated pitch, hostile to the then Tory leader, Ted Heath, hoping that it would spark something that would propel him to power. If so, it miserably failed. This week, Elvis Presley had the first of his many US number ones in 1956 with Heartbreak Hotel. And the discovery of a virus which caused AIDS was hailed as a monumental breakthrough in medical research in 1984. The HTLV3 virus was discovered to be the same as the LAV virus discovered in France. To avoid confusion, it was renamed HIV in 1987. Now get this number. An estimated 35 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the epidemic in 1981. 3 million have died so far of the coronavirus. A long way to go before it reaches the kind of numbers that the AIDS virus killed across the globe. 35 million, get that number fixed in your head. On the 23rd of April in 1916, the Easter Rising of Irish Republicans against British rule began in Dublin. It was to end in military failure and the execution of its leaders, but it was far from a political failure, leading, of course, to the foundation of the Irish Free State. Amongst the leaders who were executed by firing squad was the Commander-in-Chief, James Connolly, a socialist and trade union organiser from Edinburgh. He had been wounded in the fighting and was taken to his execution in a military ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, tied to a chair to receive the bullets of the firing squad. It was a big mistake by the British rulers and made martyrs of people that made the final defeat of British power in Ireland even more likely. The first decimal coins were making their way into purses throughout Britain in this week in 1968 in preparation for replacing the system of pounds, shillings and pence. A dark day. The 5 new pence and 10 new pence coins operated for a time alongside the shilling and the florin of fond memory and had the same value. They were also the same size and weight, and this caused initial confusion to shoppers, many of whom refused to take them. I'm a little surprised, says the editor who wrote these words, that since we've left the EU, a Tory backbencher hasn't come up with the idea of reintroducing the shilling and the 12-sided threepenny bit. Well, let me do so here now on the mother of all talk shows. I'm only joking, am I? Well, that's it. another tumultuous 7 days across the centuries. That was the week. That was. Let's take the first call of the evening from Sarkar in Glasgow. Go ahead, Sarkar.
George, good evening. Really nice to see your show. I must say, George, the first 15 minutes of your show with relation to Afghanistan, believe me, it can only be topped by your speech at the Senate.
Oh, thank you.
What a display of facts, George. Fantastic.
Thank you.
George, question is about much closer home. First of all, I really want to see you and Alex Salmond going in the debate. Let's see whether Alex Salmond is strong enough. Now, the second thing is, George...
He is strong enough, so it would be... Look, what possible reason could there be for a candidate running for office to refuse 20 minutes live on BBC Scotland in a debate 3 days before polling day? You'd have to have your head examined to refuse that. And when I was invited by the BBC to debate him, I immediately accepted, and I presume that he has too. But on Twitter over the last day or so, I see someone who's referred to as his spokesman saying that he won't be turning up, washing his hair that night or something. I don't know. Go ahead, Sarkar.
George, so basically my question is, so far, the accusation against Nicola Sturgeon was she's only bluffing and blustering. You know, she doesn't technically want a referendum. And because the other side, the ALBA party, want a referendum ASAP if they get a mandate. Now, today only Alex Salmond has said, for so many days they've been saying we'll go in the single market. Now they're saying we won't be joining the EU straight away. Now they're saying we don't want the European currency. We don't know what currency we'll have. What are these nationalists up to? They don't know whether they want independence. They don't know whether they want to join the single market. They don't have a currency, and they still think the people are fools, that they'll believe in their, unicorns, that they can deliver independence and make Scotland a prosperous state. What's wrong with them, George?
Well, I couldn't put it better than that. When Nicola Sturgeon joined the Scottish National Party, their policy was for withdrawal from the European Economic Community, the common market. And of course, if Sturgeon and Salmond had succeeded in tearing Scotland out of the United Kingdom in 2014, we'd already have been 7 years out of the European Union. So it's all smoke and mirrors, Sarkar, as you are clearly inferring. The idea that the European Union will accept Scotland when the European continent is beset by multiple separatist challenges, even in Germany, in Bavaria, in Italy, in France, in Belgium, in many other, in Spain, and especially in Spain, the idea that the European Union wants to encourage separatism is rather absurd. The opposite is true. But secondly, even if the European Union would admit Scotland into membership, the convergence terms that we would be required to meet and get ahead of Albania and North Macedonia and all the other places that are candidate members at the moment, in order to achieve the convergence terms, we would have to so decimate our public services, our public sector, as to impoverish the half of the Scottish population that isn't impoverished at the minute. So no political party could do that. And so actually what the SNP, if they succeed, will do is take Scotland out of the United Kingdom, but not take it into the European Union. A kind of cold water Albania under Enver Hoxha until the end of the Cold War. Sarkar, thanks very much for that call. The UK number is 02077 982 255, and the US number is 001 757 744 4480. And of course, you can tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK News. Let's hear from Michael, our good friend in Minneapolis, who's covering the Chauvin trial for us. Michael, what's happened this week?
Well, George, I'd like to have this call in two parts and maybe afford me a little more time than usual. This is as upset as you've ever heard me. There's no question about that. So I will briefly start with the Chauvin trial. The defense made its case this week. I'll just hit the main points really quickly. Retired police officer and so-called use of force expert by the name of Barry Broad stated that Chauvin acted with what he called objective reasonableness, and he framed George Floyd's death as an accident. They had a medical expert testify about a condition called excited delirium, which officers in the United States are taught causes superhuman strength in people, and medical experts reject that and do not believe it's a real condition. But police officers in the United States are taught that that it is a real condition.
And who is alleged to have had that? Floyd or Chauvin?
Floyd. So this is police use the excited delirium explanation as why they have to use excessive force. Basically, they say that when someone gets their adrenaline up, they're capable of the idea they're capable of anything is sort of. I know police officers personally, and they're taught that. They're taught to be very afraid of all the people in the public they come into contact with because of that. That's how they teach them. They interviewed a friend of George Floyd who testified that he had fallen asleep in the car and said he was tired from working too much when the police arrived. According to her, his first words to police when he opened his car window were, "Please don't shoot me," which is tragic. And the defense medical expert testified that Floyd died of a combination of cardiac arrest and illicit drugs. So the defense rested their case. They had Friday off. Both sides will make closing statements on Monday, and then the jury will be sequestered until they reach a verdict. But in the midst of all this, George, what I really want to talk about is the Daunte Wright killing and the response to that, because I'm pretty upset.
Now tell people on this side of the pond what that killing is.
So on Sunday, Daunte Wright, a 20-year-old man, was pulled over in Brooklyn Center, which is a nearby suburb of Minneapolis. He had for having an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. Once he was pulled over for that, it turned out that he had expired tabs and a warrant for a missed court date, which I believe was related to an unlicensed gun possession. When they tried to take Daunte Wright into custody, he panicked, got away from the police, got into his car, and tried to drive away. At that point, police officer Kim Potter, a 26-year veteran of the force, pulled her gun out and shot him. And Wright tried to drive away, but quickly crashed his car and subsequently died. Potter claimed immediately that she had meant to grab her taser, but grabbed her gun by accident. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn, and you're gonna love that, because a taser and a gun are not the same weight. They don't carry them officers carry them on opposite sides of their body. They don't look the same. They don't feel the same. They're not similar instruments.
And this has acted as another spark.
George, it took an already extremely tense community and sent it into absolute crisis. Protests broke out immediately, and the governor also almost immediately ordered a curfew in 4 counties that encompass both Brooklyn Center and Minneapolis. And he made, Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, made one of the most chilling statements I've ever heard. And he said, "The largest police presence in Minnesota history will be prepared. You will be arrested. You will be charged." And boy, I'll tell you, George, it is the largest presence. I've never seen anything like it. There are all the buildings and are boarded up around me. All the businesses are boarded up. The library's boarded up. There was a quiet over the city I've never seen before. There are sirens blaring day and night. There are National Guard soldiers all over the place. There are tanks, George, in the middle of my community. Just as I walk around my neighborhood, you see them. All you see is law enforcement everywhere you go. In fact, just a couple days ago, we found out that the governor contacted the state of Ohio and is bringing in massive amounts more troops from Ohio, more police officers, to, as if we didn't have enough. And every police officer is on duty. I mean, there are sirens blaring day and night, George. I saw, the other day I was just walking across the street, and I saw 8 police SUVs drive by, one after the next after the next. It is, I mean, it feels like we've been fully occupied by our own police force. And even as this has happened, the way they're dealing with the protests is absolutely insane. They're tear gassing and pepper spraying protesters, and not just protesters, but journalists too. They've been attacking journalists. They've been arresting journalists. They're on camera telling journalists they have to get out of there, that they want them to leave. I mean, George, this
it's very disturbing. Here's an idiot's question from this side of the pond, at least. This kind of thing, you know, wouldn't surprise me if it was happening in, I don't know, Birmingham, Alabama, or in Chicago even. But why Minneapolis? Why is Minneapolis the most tinder box of them all?
I don't have a great explanation for this. I really think it comes down, this happens all over the country. It happens all the time. I think it comes down to the George Floyd, the video being as egregious as it was. Watching a man be killed in slow motion for 9 minutes has just set it ablaze. But it's not a new issue in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is historically a very segregated city. And it's diverse for the Midwest, but there are definitely a lot of issues. I would say it's the kind of city that's very progressive in the sense that it's very welcoming if you're, an LGBTQ plus member. But I think if you're a black person, it's still a pretty rough place to be. There's also a very large Somali population here, which a lot of people are very racist against Somalis here. So that's a big thing.
Finally, Michael, when do we expect a verdict?
Well, George, like I said, the jury will begin deliberations on Tuesday, and it could be 3 hours, it could be 3 weeks. It really depends on if they can come to a consensus. But George, I feel like I'm occupied in my own city. I don't know. I've never been this upset. I don't know where we go from here.
Michael, heartbreaking, and thanks for describing it so powerfully here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Do please come back next week and tell us how things have developed. Which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest? John Major, Tony Blair, or David Cameron? Almost 3,000 people have voted, and 3/4 of them are in no doubt that it is Tony Blair. Now, what follows is a party political broadcast on behalf of, well, you'll see I endorse this message. It takes a special kind of brass neck, a Nicola Sturgeon neck, you might call it, to shower promises of freebies made possible only by Scotland being a part of the Union and receiving a massive subvention greater than any other part of the United Kingdom from the Treasury in London to pay for freebies for votes that will be used to break up the Union that paid for the freebies in the first place. That's if you get the freebies. It's very important to remember all the freebies they promised in the past. You remember they promised to scrap the council tax? It's still here. You remember they promised to give all of our children a laptop that they could use during the long lockdown when they were shut out of school? Again, they're still not here. But hey, you're getting a bike. Where you're going to put the bike is of course not yet clear. If you live in a block of flats, if you live in the high flats, where you're going to put your bike, hey, we'll deal with that later. I'll hazard a guess that you'll never see those bikes. They will be as rare as hen's teeth, just like the laptops. They are a mirage, and a mirage which, with mind-numbing repetitivity, the SNP promise before every election. It takes a sturgeon neck to promise everything you're going to do in the next 5 years when you've actually been in power for 14 years and haven't done any of them. Close the attainment gap between the children from rich and poor families. Promise made, promise broken. The ferries, promise made, promise broken. The Sick Children's Hospital in Edinburgh, promise made, promise broken. Time after time after time, the SNP promise but do not deliver. So this election is not about what promises the SNP are going to break in the next 5 years. We already know that. This election is about this. They are going to use your vote as a mandate to take Scotland deeper into the never-ending. Faster on the hamster wheel. They'll pedal faster and faster. You won't hear any more from them about mental health, about child poverty, about closing the attainment gap. These things are all sideshows. The SNP, Green, Alba, Nationalist Front exist for only one purpose, and your vote has only one meaning for them: as a lever to try and break apart the United Kingdom. I believe in the Union, not for the same reason that everybody else who believes in it does. I believe in the Union in the same way I believe in a trade union, that we are stronger together, that divided we fall, that if we allow an injury to one, an injury will in the end be inflicted on all. I will not accept that a hard border between Scotland and England can destroy our economy, can impoverish our people, and turn grievance and grudge into a national religion. Because that's what will happen. When their independence project goes sour, who do you think they're going to blame? Themselves, their project, or are they going to blame the other? And we all know who in Scotland the other is. And we'd have, like they had in the Republic of Ireland, 99 years of civil war type politics, where the only thing that mattered was where you had stood in 1920 and 1921. That's not the kind of politics I believe in or that I have practiced all of my life. I believe that the British people have a real chance in this next period, now that we're free of the fading, failing European Union, which is falling apart at the seams, to build a better Britain, a Britain to be proud of. You may not agree with me on what kind of Britain that should be, but we must all agree on this. If Britain no longer exists, arguments about what kind of Britain we're going to have are necessarily OTOs. So you have a chance on the 6th of May, on the purple ballot paper, to vote smart, vote tactically, vote for the candidate with the best chance of defeating the SNP. And on the peach-coloured ballot paper, the orange ballot paper, for the regional lists, everyone should give their vote to All for Unity, a coalition of people of left, right and centre who are united by one big thing. We believe in Britain and Scotland's place in the Union. Thank you very much for listening.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Not much silence from my lambs during that peroration. You've still got, 10 minutes to vote on which former British Prime Minister is the sleaziest. And while you're doing that, let's hear from Miles in London. Go ahead, Miles.
Oh, hey, George.
Hi.
Tony Blair's the sleaziest. That's an easy question. That one.
Overwhelming, yeah, 75% and climbing.
Yeah. And George, I saw you on the Rick Sanchez show this week talking about Afghanistan.
Oh yes.
What people often use the Afghan war by the Soviets as an example of Russian aggression, but they were invited to defend the government of the day there. I don't know if you think that's splitting hairs or not. Or
no, up to a point. I mean, it was a government that actually presided over the only period of development and of sustained women's rights and children's education and so on. I happen to know its final president, Najibullah, who was hanged from a lamppost, his penis and genitals cut off and placed in his mouth. He was tortured to death. So I have some affection for that government, but it was a government which itself had seized power. It was not a democratically elected government, but it was the government, the only government that there has ever been in Afghanistan that actually transformed the lives of the Afghan people for the better.
Well, if you see photographs from Afghanistan in the 70s, it looked quite Western.
Yeah, well, not that Western is the acme, but if you look at the number of girls going to school, the number of girls going to university, the number of girls passing out as dentists and doctors and so on. If you look at the distribution of land to the peasants from the big landowners, if you look at all the metrics of success and progress in a country, that period was a golden age. And the United States, as a matter of willful policy, carried out by the saintly Jimmy Carter and his foreign secretary, Brzezinski, they willfully brought all that to an end by arming and funding and proselytizing for the Islamist head choppers and heart eaters. It was an early harbinger, Miles, of exactly what we've seen since, not least in Libya and in Syria.
Exactly, yeah. Great having Richard on, the Assange guy. I follow him and Jimmy Dore a lot.
He's really good, He's a very, very fine writer, actually,
Yeah. And if we don't get Julian out of Belmarsh and invigorate the whistleblowing landscape, we're inviting another 4 or 5 forever wars. Afghanistan, the Americans may leave Afghanistan and leave their contractors behind as they do these days, but forever wars, the war machine will carry on if we don't invigorate the whistleblowing landscape.
Well, it's big business, Miles, as you know. The cost to the U.S. taxpayer, quite apart from the 2,400 dead soldiers, the cost to the taxpayer has been $2 trillion. Now, a lot of people made a lot of money out of that $2 trillion.
Yeah, well, there's 20 trillion missing from the Pentagon budget. They can't find in the audits that they have been running. Nearly all those, since the Second World War, nearly all American wars have been fought to preserve the petrodollar. Without that petrodollar, the Americans couldn't afford to run their empire.
Well, Milo Minderbender from Catch-22 might well be the quartermaster of the Afghan war. Thanks for that, Miles. Here's Mike.
George, can I invite your listeners who are London-based to our protest that's on every Saturday at Piccadilly Circus, 4 o'clock for 2 hours?
4 p.m. every Saturday at Piccadilly Circus. This is for Julian, is it?
Eros. It's for Julian Assange. We're there every Saturday, and there's a small group of us, and everyone would be very welcome to come and join us. We've got all the signs and stuff.
Well done. Thanks, Miles, and salute to all of you. Mike is in South Carolina. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Good to talk to you again. Never miss your show.
Nice to hear from you, sir.
Yeah, just a quick point on what he was saying. As said by General Smedley Butler, war is a racket, and it's diplomacy by other means, and it's what we do. Yeah. It's what all imperial countries do.
Yeah.
And but I was calling to talk about Major McBride.
He was very
what his
impressive, I
comments were.
thought.
Yes, and I'm so definitely proud of him and what he did, putting his self on the line. And you heard him in his interview with you saying he considered suicide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He actually said
Just
that
like
in your interview.
just like Julian.
Well, I don't think I've heard Julian say he said he was going to commit suicide, but the judge did. Of course, the judge is in the pocket of the empire, and that's why
Even she had
they
to
only
find
said
against them.
That's right, but she did say that he's basically guilty of everything he said he's done. And then the thing about Julian is he is not even an American citizen, and all of this stuff is happening. He's not a British citizen, but all of these things are happening to him, without any regard to justice in itself. And that's what I fear for Major McBride is that his trial comes up next month in May, I think he said, right?
Yeah.
And if the trials of other people that are involved in these same whistleblowing for the governments, like Chelsea Manning and even people like Edward Snowden and all the rest of these people, if they ever got them to a trial, they would never let them speak. And that's the same case with Julian Assange. In his trial, he is never allowed to bring up, the truth or why he did what he did. That's just not going to happen. And I'm afraid that Major McBride is going to face the same situation, and they're going to say that it's a matter of national security, that they cannot let him say the things that he needs to say. But in all cases of war, okay, they all always migrate towards that apocalypse now whole fundamental, that they go too far because it's what they do. It's what they're taught to do.
Yeah, and it's not because they're Americans or because they're Australians or because they're British. That's what happens when you are occupying somebody else's country.
Yeah, and you have to show them that you're the boss, and that they will obey you. But it all comes down to that same thing. It's a mentality of militarism that causes this to happen.
I was concerned about him. I was concerned about Major McBride by the end of the interview. Were you?
Yes, I am, and I still am, because, like I said, I really don't believe he's going to get anything that's even resembling a fair trial in whatever he does. Now, maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised, but I doubt it. If all of these other people that have gone before him, are an example, he will not.
Two great Australians, Mike. Let's salute them: Julian Assange and Major David McBride.
I'm with you, sir.
Thank you so much for that. A bit of social media, because I don't have time to do much. Elliot says there's no competition on the poll. And if that Antichrist does not get 90% on this vote, then people need serious examination of their heads. Well, the poll's closed now, and Tony Blair won it. 75% of you think he is the sleaziest of them all. Mika says Bojo should be on this list for his government's anti-democratic, tyrannical regime's subjugation of the people, for they should be on trial within months now for malfeasance. You must be very young, Mika, if you think that Boris Johnson's government compares with previous governments of the Conservative Party. Rob says, but I can only vote for one. It's not fair. Dryden says, Dave acts sleazy. John surprised everyone with Edwina and went sleazy. Tony is and denies it. And Vob says, Blair, none of them are good people, but only Blair actively seeks out the very worst of humanity, the dictators and murderers, and tells them he'll wash the blood off their reputations, their hands, and of course, their cash. Sam says, I voted Cameron because Blair isn't sleazy. He's downright dangerous. And Roger says, oh, look, Tony Blair's on top currently. Must have lobbied to get top ranking. And Marek says, Tony Blair, obviously. The others had their fair share, but no one can beat Blair for sending our troops into an illegal war, costing thousands of their lives, all based on a lie. He also made the housing crisis worse by encouraging second homes and buy to let. Let's get the 9 o'clock news, almost bang on time, with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The funeral yesterday, the Duke of Edinburgh, was watched by more than 13 million television viewers in the UK, overnight figures show. The 1 hour service was viewed by 11 million people on the BBC and 2.1 million on ITV and around 450,000 on Sky. As well as television coverage, the Windsor service was broadcast on radio and several YouTube channels. Figures for the royal family's YouTube live stream were not available, but it was third on YouTube's worldwide trending list today. In 2002, more than 10 million watched the funeral of the Queen Mother in the UK, although that ceremony was held on a Tuesday. In 1997, the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, was watched by 31 million people, a record audience figure. A small helicopter is set to be the first to fly on another planet. Ingenuity is a 1.8 kilogram helicopter that travelled to Mars inside NASA's Perseverance rover, which landed in February. NASA say it's now aiming to test it tomorrow, but admits that it may not be successful, in which case they'll try again later in the week. A wildfire is raging out of control on the slopes of Table Mountain above the city of Cape Town, South African authorities say. The blaze has destroyed a part of a cafe at the Rhodes Memorial overlooking the city's port, and hundreds of students have been evacuated from a nearby University of Cape Town campus. The fire is moving towards the campus, the Western Cape government said. 3 helicopters are waterbombing the flames. Firefighters were first alerted at 8:45 local time. Local Environment Chief Anton Brodell said the situation was serious and the wind was picking up, which he said was a cause for concern. Health officials in Britain are looking at whether a new Indian COVID strain spreads more easily and evades vaccines. There's not yet enough data to classify it as a variant of concern, a leading scientist has said, but Dr. Susan Hopkins of Public Health England said some cases had been found in the UK that were not linked to travel, with the origin now being investigated. More than 70 cases have been identified in England and Scotland. It is also too soon to decide if India should be put on the government's travel red list, Hopkins said. The government will examine suggestions to improve lobbying rules after a series of inquiries, the Environment Secretary has pledged. George Eustice said current systems were, quote, quite robust, but it was possible that they could be, quote, tweaked or improved. He said former Prime Minister David Cameron's actions were acceptable when he lobbied ministers on behalf of the collapsing finance firm Greensill Capital. But Labour said the row over the ex-PM's work had eroded trust in politics. A government review and 3 separate MP-led inquiries are now looking into Cameron's attempts to lobby ministers on behalf of Greensill. His work for the firm, which collapsed in March, has prompted increased scrutiny of private companies' attempts to influence ministers and officials. Cameron began working as an advisor to Greensill in August 2018, just over 2 years after he stood down as Prime Minister in July 2016. Syria is to hold a presidential election next month, a move likely to maintain President Bashar al-Assad's grip on power. Assad is not expected to face serious opposition, despite continuing conflict and a growing economic crisis. After 10 years of war, the Syrian government controls most of the big population centres in the country. Across the decade, about 400,000 people have been killed and over half of Syrians displaced. The election for a president who will serve a 7-year term will take place on the 26th of May. Plans for a new and breakaway European Super Football League are expected to be announced later tonight. 6 English teams are thought to be involved, including Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal and Chelsea. Other teams are thought to include Barcelona, Juventus and Real Madrid. The project is being launched to rival UEFA's Championship League format, which currently dominates European football. However, the Premier League's chief executive, Richard Masters, has written to all of the 20 league teams stating opposition to the new project. It's understood that the American bank JP Morgan is investing some $6 billion in the project. The billionaire Issa brothers, who own Asda, have bought the British food chain Leon. More than 70 Leon restaurants across the UK and Europe have been sold to the brothers' giant petrol forecourt business, EG Group. The deal includes 42 company-owned restaurants as well as 29 franchise sites, which are mainly found in airports and train stations across the UK and a handful of European countries such as the Netherlands and Spain. And finally, the iceberg that was for a time the biggest in the world is no more. A68, as it was known, covered an area of nearly 2,300 square miles when it broke away from Antarctica in 2017. That's equal to a quarter of the size of Wales. But satellite images show that the megaberg has now virtually gone, broken into countless small fragments that the US National Ice Center says are no longer worth tracking. A68 broke from the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, and for a year it had hardly moved, but then it started to drift north with increasing speed, riding on strong currents and winds. The billion-ton block took a familiar route, spinning out into the South Atlantic towards the British Overseas Territory of South Georgia. The small island is where many of the biggest icebergs go to die. Caught in the local shallows, they are doomed to gradually melt away. To the latest here on Sputnik News, I'm Jamie.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
How beautifully poetic were those final words from young Jamie Lowe, our super newsreader. South Georgia, where icebergs go to die. That's an amazing story, that one. I hadn't actually heard it before. Here's the second and final poll of the evening. When will President Biden really withdraw US troops from Afghanistan? A, September 11th, as he's announced that he will do. B, next year. Or C, he won't. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, as I said right at the top of the show, the masses are out. I drove down Regent Street. All the shops were mobbed, making more and more bizarre the restriction to 30 of the mourners at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. Still more bizarre that the Queen had to sit on her own with not even any members of her family to hold her hand. Because in Soho, there are literally tens of thousands of people sitting at tables in narrow streets. There's been little rhyme or reason to many of the aspects of Britain's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, and not just Britain's, to be fair, but most countries, but by no means all. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, NHS consultant, physician, surgeon, has been our guide throughout it all. He is our very own Moats medic, and I'm glad to say he's still with us. Dr. Brar, thanks again for joining us. What about that point of mine? There seems no rhyme or reason to the fact that you can sit in a narrow Soho street in your thousands, but you can't sit inside anywhere. You can only have 30 people at your funeral, but you can pack into the H&M sock department, as I saw them today, in their hundreds. Explain, please.
Well, I would if I could, George, but I think it's pretty inexplicable. The bottom line is, due to the vaccination campaign, protecting the elderly and the vulnerable, we are approaching the end of, I think, the pandemic in this country. So deaths this week were down to 180. Cases remain static despite the kind of opening up. Of course, we have to watch that over the next few weeks. But I think it's likely that hospitalizations, which now stand about 2.5%, won't rise dramatically, if at all, because, as we know, it's an asymmetric disease that affects those elderly and vulnerable who now are relatively protected. The vaccination rate in the country, let's say, is 60% of the adult population. That basically means we've had almost 33 million people have had at least one dose. And now that's been quite static for a little while, because now we're concentrating on the second dose for that vulnerable part of the population. So almost 9.5 million people have had their second dose of vaccine.
I'm one of them, Doctor, and I've lived to tell the tale.
As am I, George. I'm one of the very early, due to my status as a health professional. So yeah, absolutely. And I've been relatively well, and despite several points at which we've had concerns about safety and efficacy, essentially we know that against the worst parts of the coronavirus, so death and hospitalization, almost all the vaccines that have been rolled out are universally effective. Some more so than others.
Now, I've had two, you've had two. Might we have to have three? Might this become like a flu jab that certain people get every year?
Difficult to know. The main thing at the moment we're seeing on a worldwide scale is that we reached on Friday the largest number of new diagnosed cases worldwide ever in the pandemic. We've peaked again on the basis of the third wave in Europe, and at least second wave in India. India over the weekend had 250,000 new test diagnosed cases, but of course there are many people who will have had cases without being diagnosed, and we may never know the true figures. You asked me last week about India, and of course they had just last week they had the Kumbh Mela, where something like 1.5 million sadhus, kind of Hindu religious men, come together in Haridwar and Rishikesh and kind of bathe in the Ganges ritually. So all of these kind of mass festivals are going on, and it does seem to be quite rampant in India at the moment. They've also announced a new variant in India. There have been variants, to be honest, throughout the pandemic, and those are not new. There are at least 4 or 5 which are of concern, but none of them really have shown an increased rate of mortality. Some have been more infectious, like our own Kent variant. But equally, none of them have shown themselves to be resistant against the majority of the vaccinations. Though the South Africa variant, there was some question whether it was the AstraZeneca vaccine probably may not be fully effective, at least against transmission, but probably still is, interestingly, against what we really worried about, which is the hospitalizations and deaths. So overall, I haven't seen very clear evidence that we're going to need to perpetually vaccinate the population against COVID, George.
What resistance to vaccination are you finding amongst the population, or have you heard your colleagues describe? There was, of course, quite boisterous anti-vax protests and so on, but even, people like Peter Hitchens, an arch skeptic, in the end got vaccinated. I suspect that's what will happen. Do you share that view?
That's interesting. I'd followed Peter Hitchens' Twitter feed, their kind of endless campaign against muzzles. To be honest, I'm at the point where we think we probably can dispense with masks if we reach a herd immunity within the population, and I think that should happen relatively soon. That's my personal opinion, and there's a divided opinion about that. The fact that Peter Hitchens is vaccinated, I think, it just shows you that the vast majority of the population are in favour of it. It's not a technology we're unfamiliar with. Everyone wants to move beyond this and back to normal life, and this offers us a clear way out. Of course, it wasn't the only way out. Of course, if we'd done non-pharmaceutical measures properly, I still have to. I haven't mentioned China for a long time, but China has 20 times the population, but 1/20th of the number of coronavirus deaths, precisely because they put their resources and healthcare infrastructure and economic infrastructure squarely and firmly behind the problem of protecting their population, which turned out to be the best way of protecting all interests within the country, including the economic interests, George.
Now, as you know, I favour trials, criminal trials, for manslaughter and negligence, a misuse of public office for those responsible for the earlier part of this pandemic that put so many of our people in the cold earth. But that probably will not happen in the short term. But what's happening on the issue of a public inquiry? Are they going ahead with it? Who will constitute it? What would its terms of reference be? What do you expect from that, Doctor?
I haven't heard more about, I've heard the Tory party several months ago say that they would institute one, after the event ex post facto. But I have very little faith in it. I mean, your show has covered quite extensively the goings on at Greensill Capital. You only need to look at that relationship between very big business and government, that revolving door between the NHS and industry, which of course Labour and Tory have been joint in promoting. I think your poll was quite right to say that Tony Blair was the most corrupt Prime Minister. Tony Blair Institute or Associates, and that company, which advises not just Indonesia, but Kazakhstan, all kinds of governments, West African governments, all kinds of governments and dictators really around the world about how best to protect their financial interests at the expense of their people, has amassed capital of hundreds of millions, and it's hard to disentangle how much of that is Tony Blair's personal wealth, and that's not an accident. That's a deliberate structuring of his company. So he may well have between 100 and 400 million pounds. His property portfolio alone is worth 50 or 60 million pounds, I'm led to understand. And that's kind of widely available information. But it doesn't stop there. If you look at this Lex Greensill, who himself was an advisor to David Cameron when he set up his capital group, Greensill Capital, who went on to profit hugely, essentially, by his access to government revenue streams. If you look at the people he's had meetings with, the people he's had in the books, not just David Cameron, who you quite rightly say, we've learnt that 30 million is the price of a UK Prime Minister, this allegedly incorruptible position, but it's not just him. So he was able, through Cameron, to get access to not just Tony Blair, but key figures within the NHS. So Matt Hancock, Simon Stevens, who of course really runs and administers the NHS day-to-day, Dido Harding, who we know had access to 40 or 50 billion for the track and trace scheme. We're constantly texting Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson in order to try and gain access to the COVID bailout money, which is meant to be protecting jobs. But in fact, what we saw overwhelmingly was protecting big business interests. You can see this extremely close link between, if you like, the finance capitalists, the biggest bankers, the wealthiest individuals in our society, and the upper echelons of government. And of course, this is the David Cameron who made speeches about, we all know the way this works. We all know the way this works through the private dinners, the lunches, the informal conversations, the way in which government is secured by 1,000 threads to this ruling caste, this financial elite. We're seeing this before our eyes. And equally, we've seen the inquiry around the Iraq War. When I remember very clearly Murdoch coming before and Tony Blair coming before that inquiry, and really insouciantly, nonchalantly, just brushing it off as if these were people who are above any kind of legal justice, really, in our country, whose wealth and privilege made them immune to normal processes of governance. It's very interesting. There were mugs that I'll try and stop it, George, but there were mugs that I remember 10 years ago seeing that were given around the NHS saying, corruption and fraud is costing the NHS £1 billion a year. And we're all encouraged to have mugs were distributed around staff rooms and to report if we saw anything. We're talking about petty pilfering of drugs and equipment. But, these people, by positioning themselves close to the revenue streams, we found a civil service, Bill Crothers, top officer in the civil service, just before he was giving out 40 billion worth of contracts of government money, was having intimate meetings with, Lex Greensill, but he won't be the only one. This, in fact, we're finding increasingly is the standard way in which our government works, by which, means really the very policy, the fabric of government is alienated from the very people who are meant to vote for it, we're meant to be, as citizens, the people who are in charge of government. We can see clearly by this policy that the very wealthy have taken that away from us, and this is precisely why, government policy doesn't address the needs of the vast majority of British workers, George. So I hold out very little hope that we'll see any real comeback for these things. I look forward to seeing developments, and certainly we can do everything we can do to highlight the grievances. But until British workers are able to bring forward a new kind of politics, which is able to hold these people to political account, Labour and Tory, because you only need to look at, Alan Milburn or Patricia Hewitt to see their links to finance capital, to big health firms. So this is this revolving door, you do our bidding while you're in power, and when you get out of power,
we'll look after you. Yeah,
absolutely. Is really something that is goes to the very heart of why we are seeing the progressive privatisation of our health service, George.
Powerful stuff. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, here's the second poll. When will President Biden really withdraw US troops from Afghanistan? September the 11th, only 15% of you believe that Joe Biden was telling the truth when he announced that date this last few days. Next year, 8% of you. But 77% of you think he won't withdraw them at all. Just think about that and give me a minute to collect my thoughts.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. So what exactly are you on here telling me? That it's not infectious?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy.
Right. Well, I'm going to quote Doctor, and he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You can watch it for yourself.
You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities. I can trust them, or I can go with Wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not.
Wee Ben on YouTube.
Am not on the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. Look, you started out by saying COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile nonsense.
Radio Sputnik. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom. and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I'd forgotten that one. If you think you could do better than Ben, come and have a go. If you think you're hard enough, Paul has done so. He's from London. Go ahead, Paul.
What's George? I don't know if you've heard about this Super League stuff.
Oh, I'm boiling. I'm boiling with rage about it, Paul.
Yeah, honestly, I knew you were a bit of a football fan, so I just want to get your opinion on it.
Well, I'll tell you, I rest my case as the magical 5 minutes on Sky earlier this evening by Gary Neville, who'd make a great Prime Minister, in my view. Gary Neville, in 5 minutes, destroyed the imposters, as he called them, who own and misrun our football clubs. The billionaire owners of Liverpool, of Manchester United, of Tottenham Hotspur, the billionaire owners of these other clubs that are proposing to betray the rest of football in their country in a fake competition which is not a competition, purely for the making of even more money than they're already making. I spit upon them, Paul. The day when it comes that these football clubs can be taken from the hands of these tyrants and dictators and sports washing murderers in the Middle East and in the Gulf, and from the billionaires that own the others, the day cannot come quick enough for this people's game to be returned to the hands of the people. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. I find the whole thing, the thing I find most disgusting about it is this whole no relegation thing.
Yeah.
So that's just like...
That's a cartel. That's not a league. Yeah. That's a cartel.
It's criminal. I couldn't say any more. You said it. You put it perfectly, George.
Thank you, Paul. If you haven't seen Gary Neville, do check him out. His statement was absolutely magical television. And I take my hat off to him and to Sky Sports for allowing him to do it. Let's go to Portugal, who wouldn't, and talk to Vitor. Go ahead, right. Vitor.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Yeah. So I'm confused as to what's going on with Afghanistan. It's like freedoms, like, isn't that what we're about? Like freedom, right? So everybody keeps.
Who's about that? Who do you think is all about freedom? The United States?
Also, but who are we? We're about freedom, and it's like next minute it's all gone, and like everybody's taking it for granted, and then it's like, who are we going to be after this, right? So like the withdrawal of troops, I'm like, well, technically, what I've read is that apparently the Taliban are ready to take over.
Sure. Yeah. That's a fact. But yeah. Do you want soldiers to stay there for 100 years war?
Well, no. Well, let's just say that we stand for freedom.
You keep saying that, Vitor. I'm wondering who you're referring to that stands for freedom. Do you think the United States stood for freedom in Vietnam?
To an extent.
My goodness. My goodness. Yeah. Have you been away for a long stretch? The United States massacred 4 million people in Indochina, dropped chemical weapons on them from a great height, with the support of others that you call we, who are all about freedom. Where did you pick up this idea? Have you been smoking some of that now legal Portuguese tobacco?
Well, that's a great question. I'm so glad that you touched that point. Yeah, because that's precisely the point I was trying to frame. So the point I'm framing here is the following. freedom does not come cheap. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Why don't you get a tin hat and go and fight in Afghanistan?
Oh, like in what sense?
Well, you're talking about freedom costing blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
I've met people all over the world that are ready to fight to the last drop of somebody else's blood. I'm asking you, why don't you get a tin hat, become a contractor or a mercenary, and go and fight for this freedom of yours in Vietnam? Why not, Vitor?
Again, I'm just loving the inquest. I'm loving it. However, you do, in a sense, you have actually answered the question with your question.
Well, I'm very angry, you see, about the people who caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, thousands of them our own people, in a war which was a war of choice, which could have been ended on the terms it's now going to end at any single day of the last 20 years. The terms on which we are now leaving Afghanistan were available to us in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and onwards. I'm very angry about it because I don't view foreign affairs through a glass darkly from Portugal, talking abstractly about freedom. I don't believe that we are in these wars for freedom, Vitor. Last word to you.
Well, it's not like I'm in a privileged position. However, again, I will reinforce the point that freedom does not come for free, and it takes a lot of effort to give all these people, around the world, the freedoms that they enjoy.
Well, off you go. I keep saying this to you. Why don't you go and spend your blood in Afghanistan for freedom? Why don't you? Why don't you get a tin hat and a ticket from Lisbon Airport now and fly to Afghanistan and volunteer?
Well, that's a valid point. Again,
thanks.
I'm just, I'm grateful. But let's just
right on, man.
think.
Right on, man.
Yeah.
Eve is in Idaho. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I wanted to say something about Ukraine because I finally understood last week what was the game and what was the goal of each side. In 2014, at the Maidan coup, I wondered why Putin did not take those two provinces of Donbass and the other one, Ludansk, I don't know how to say it. And we had the answer last week by Lavrov. Lavrov said that essentially there will not be any East Ukraine and West Ukraine, or, the goal of United States is to split Ukraine in two. It is to do like they did in Syria, like they did in Sudan, like they did in Korea, like they did in Libya. They split in two, they move NATO. They cannot go all the way, but they will move NATO 300 miles. And I understood last week that Lavrov said there won't be a Western Ukraine. Either there is a neutral Ukraine within its border, or there won't be there won't be any separation with an Eastern Ukraine and a Western Ukraine. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, you've said it very powerfully, and I don't need to add to it. The idea that Russia will accept a NATO militarized Western Ukraine on its borders is for the birds. They will not accept that. So either Ukraine continues as it was before, as a neutral country, not acting as a spear in the side of Russia, or Russia will act. And it will be right to act, as anyone would act, as the United States would act if Mexico was moving its vast armies and nuclear weapons to the border with Texas. Nobody would accept that, would they, Eve?
Absolutely. But you see, when Putin didn't annex the Donbass, he lost 15% of his electorate because, like me, the Russians didn't understand why he did not do that. And now we understand why. It's because he leaves the Ukrainians the choice to keep their own country minus Crimea. And that's why he did that. That's what Lavrov did that. And I understood that only last week, and I thought maybe it was interesting.
Well, listening to Mr. Lavrov is one of my favorite pastimes. Thanks, Eve. Nathan is in Falkirk. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Nathan.
How are you doing, George?
Good, thank you. Good show tonight, I think.
Definitely. George, I just wanted to talk about the SNP and their lack of clear economic policy, lack of economic, actual anything economic. The argument is so weak and ridiculous that I think we can see the failure of the SNP in education by the fact that they are producing followers in large droves and numbers who don't understand basic things and basic concepts about finance. And you had a caller on recently who said that in an independent Scotland, that Scotland would be able to quantitatively ease the British pound.
Yes, I did. He's never been back, funnily enough, Nathan. we made him a national fool.
I nearly had a heart attack on that call, but it made me realise, George, the Unionists should be slaughtering Scottish independence arguments because they have no credibility when it comes down to what the currency is. Who would pay for state pensions? What about unfunded pensions? How would that work in an independent Scotland? No person could go to the bank without a credible business plan and ask for a loan, but yet the Scottish National Party seem to think and are getting away with the fact that they're producing financially illiterate people through the education system that don't think independently, don't have facts, and don't seem to care about the fact that if we hadn't had the United Kingdom and the backing of the Bank of England, that Scotland would have been utterly devastated during the COVID-19.
Twice, Nathan, in 2008 and again in the last 15, 16 months. Twice.
Absolutely. And I'm yet to hear one single...
Mind you, you're going to get a bike, Nathan. I don't know if you've got somewhere to keep it.
Well, it's remember the penny for Scotland, George, as well with the SNP. Remember that
I
years
do.
ago? And where's Charlie Ian Blackford? But I mean, it's scandal after scandal. But I just cannot believe the fact that we have such financial illiteracy in the Scottish National Party, and yet they seem to go on regardless. I'd like Nicola Sturgeon to explain who will pay state pensions, who will pay the unfunded pensions of those that work in the NHS if Scotland was to become independent. What would our currency be, and what would be our GDP? Can they tell us any of this, George? If they can, I'm yet to hear it.
Well, Nathan, that's the call of the night, so I'm not going to add to it. I hope that everyone fully focused on what you had to say. Terrific call. Terrific, unanswerable call. Chris is in Colchester. Let's hear from Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, well done for getting Lewis McCloud on, by the way. Actually,
he's wonderful,
I've heard him on Mike Graham. Yeah, I've heard him on Mike Graham's show quite a lot. He's hilarious. Hopefully, you'll make him a regular.
Truly wonderful.
Guest.
If he'll come, we'll have him every week.
Good. I just wondered if anyone had heard about the Matt Hancock's advisor being caught in a leaked email saying that the lateral flow test could be as low as 2% accurate and at best 25% accurate. We already know the PCR test, according to Kerry Mullis, the creator, saying it doesn't even tell you if it's sick and it's being misused. The we know that by the amount of threshold cycles being used. Even Fauci said if it's over 35 cycles, it's useless, and some of them are running at 45. So all our policies are being based on these false positives from both tests, and I just think there should be some real investigation into finding out how many are false positives.
Yeah, well, a real investigation is something I'm very much looking forward to, Chris. I hope to do so from either this studio or, in addition to this studio, other platforms. I intend, if I can, to force open the books. And I mean all the books. I mean the books about procurement. I mean the books about misinformation, disinformation. I mean the books about lobbying. I mean the books of the one scandal after another that disfigured this country in the early part of the pandemic. And I look forward to your support with that.
Well,
thanks, Chris, for that.
yes.
Let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Okay, first question. Do you regret voting against school meals?
I'm glad we were able to put the current system in place.
But do you regret it?
Well, we have got the system, and I'm glad that we have got it, and we are able to put that system in place.
Can you just answer the question, please?
Well, that's not how we do things at the moment.
Look, just say yes or no.
Glad.
Okay, let's see if we can get you to answer a straight question. What day is it today?
That's a great question. I'm glad that you've asked it.
It's Sunday.
I'll put it into my own words. Thank you very much. It's a day in the week. It's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and it's definitely not the day or after Monday. So some would say the end of the week, or the beginning, sort of. And I'm glad of that.
Don't get wrapped up in all that nonsense. Keep listening to the mother of all talk shows.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Blimey, 4/5 of you don't believe Joe Biden was telling the truth last week. Jim says perhaps he needs them back to start World War III in the Ukraine, beginning to realize why NATO-hating Trump was run out of town. And Joswar says Biden doesn't get to decide. The Pentagon does. Troops will stay. And Mark says, isn't Joe's brother up to his neck in military rebuilding projects that get dished out like sweets to private contractors? Joe's got a brother. And Volps says he's a Democrat. War is their tool of distraction. While the economy tanks, they've always got a headline. And Helen says, here's a poll. You take public office during a global pandemic. Do you, A, give the people health care? B, give them an income to get through it? C, bomb Syria? I wish we'd thought of that one, Helen. And Gary says the key word is troops. Contractors and or security spooks will probably be there forever. And Pat says he's probably forgotten he even said such a thing. That's a fair point. James says perhaps not the right question. When will Kamala Harris withdraw troops? When will the US military decide there is no gain being in Afghanistan? Biden isn't running anything. And Brendan says US regulars will withdraw, but US mercenaries will replace them. Where there's war, there's money. And Kevin says, I have hope he really will withdraw. The private companies who profit off war will fight tooth and nail to keep the war going. Really, it's a question of him being able to withstand their attacks. And Vob says, never. The military and the people making billions from endless wars will never let him. Well, if your son, brother, father, husband is a US military contractor who intends staying on in Afghanistan after the US military have left, I urgently caution you to ask them to find a different job, another profession, because the Taliban will be back in power in the center of Kabul within weeks, if not days, of that foreign withdrawal. Don't be a martyr for money to Joe Biden's troop withdrawal. It's my strong and honest advice. Malcolm is in Edinburgh. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Hey, Malcolm. Hey, George. Thanks very much for taking my call.
Welcome.
I thought your introduction is always good, and it's always my favourite part of the show, but I think you were outdone today by Lewis McCloud. That was one of the favourite things I've ever seen online. He was hysterical, and seeing you almost with tears in your eyes, George, he was a delight.
He was absolutely phenomenal. Phenomenal. Yeah. It was radio, TV gold.
It was great. A couple of points, George. First of all, Salmon will back down from you because he knows that you'll expose him. You know,
it's going to be hard to explain that, though, Malcolm. How do you explain 3 days before polling day to the voters that you turned down a 20-minute live debate with me on BBC Scotland? How do you turn that down? What do you say? I'm washing my hair, or I have got something more important to do? That will reach more voters? It's going to be hard to justify that.
It is, but if you look at it, it's like you've obviously got Nicola and you've got Salmon who have got their egos, and his undermining thing is independence for Scotland, and he realises that you will damage that by going head to head with him because he knows you're going to wipe him clean.
Well, it's kind of you to say, but it's a big risk for Alex not to do it because he needs it. Everything tells me, I could feel it in my water that he needs it. He needs to be the champion of the independence cause. And even if he loses to me, he'll inflict some blows. It will not be a one-punch knockout or anything like that. I think he needs it. If he's watching now, Alec, I really mean it, mate. You need it. Don't run away from this fight.
Well, he needs to stand up and stand for his principles. You know, if he's big enough to go for what he's going for, he needs to stand up. I hope he does it, but I honestly, in my heart, I don't believe he will. Because you will wipe the floor with him. Fortunately or unfortunately. But that's not my point, George. I'm going to go to my point, which is basically, I went to the dentist yesterday, okay, and I was talking to my dentist about...
Is it free yet, Malcolm?
Yes.
Is it free yet, the dentist?
Well, this is my point, George, right?
Okay, sorry.
I spoke to my dentist, and my dentist she's a lovely lady, and she said this whole SNP thing, free dentistry, 4-day working weeks, free laptops for everybody, everything's free.
And a bike, don't forget the bike.
And free bikes, exactly. And she said it's a pack of lies, and that's a phrase that you're very familiar with, George, It's a pack of lies. They've been in power for 14 years. Why all of a sudden give 4-day working weeks, free laptops, free dentistry? They are a disgrace. They've had 14 years not to deliver on children's hospitals, I'm getting excited. I've just got a couple of things to say, George.
I knew that because I felt you were rustling your sweetie papers.
Well, I've had a couple of bevies, to be fair. So, but I do get passionate about it.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. Nothing's free, of course, Malcolm.
Well,
nothing.
I tell
Neither
you what,
the laptop,
George,
nor the bike, nor the dentist, nor the prescription. $1.5 billion to give free prescriptions to lawyers in Morningside. None of that is actually free. It's being paid for by somebody.
You know what scares me, George, right? Now, people talk about Scotland and freedom and all this beautiful stuff, and they say eloquently, I disagree with you on so many principles, right? And to see you as a leftist voting for Conservative and to see me as a rightist prepared to vote Labour just to get rid of SNP because they are so toxic to Scotland, I'm proud Scot. I'm a proud Britain person. And I disagree with you on so many things. You even clipped me to make me look like an idiot. And I respect your ability to do that. If I was in power and I used the hate crime law, I would have you put in jail. We are moving towards a North Korean thing. Very slowly, but very dangerously, George. And I don't like the direction Scotland's taking under the SNP.
It's very dark, Malcolm. A substantial number of the SNP's nationalist base think that you and I should be on the road south, and if we don't do it voluntarily, perhaps we'll have to be forced to do it. I'm not being melodramatic. There's a lot of them think that way, and they express it, sometimes in their own name, on social media.
It's a sad state of affairs, George, when you have to leave your home under, armed guard because of a serious death threat. In Scotland, I know it happened, and it breaks my heart. It's like I agree with 90% of what you say, George, but one thing I agree with is that I love Scotland and you love Scotland, and we want the best for Scotland. Yeah, and I look forward to
otherwise we'd just let them get on with it, Malcolm. You and I have got transferable skills. We don't have to live in Scotland. We could live somewhere else, but we prefer to stay in our own land and make it better.
There's fewer and fewer people like that, George. There's fewer and fewer people prepared to stand up against it, and it's actually getting dangerous. As you now know, it's getting dangerous to oppose this.
I do. My house is like Fort Knox now, Malcolm. Listen, thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Let's go to Adnan in Hull on Afghanistan. Go ahead, Adnan.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Thanks for talking to me. I just wanted to know your opinion about the actual aims and objectives of the Western troops, particularly U.S. They have been sort of sustaining a lot of casualty and loss of soldiers, but they've been continued to be present in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. And now they decided to sort of, at least they are saying that they're going to withdraw. So if I don't think that providing Afghan people with what you call it, independence, or that was their objective. But what do you think were their real objectives now they decided that they cannot achieve?
Sorry to cut you short just because of the hour. You get to the stage where we're here because we're here because we're here. We cannot leave without achieving anything. We cannot achieve anything. Ergo, we cannot leave. But there comes a point where even us, after 20 years of enormous cost in blood and treasure, can no longer justify continuing with that war. And I'm angry, as you heard earlier, because the basis on which we are leaving, which is that the Taliban will be back in control before you can say Jack Robinson, was available to us from the first year, never mind the 20th. That's why I'm so angry about it. Adnan, thanks. Jimmy's in Melbourne on the same subject. We better go down under. It's early there. Jimmy, welcome.
Hi, George.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so, we're talking about the Afghanistan war. I don't really like the word war. It's more of a occupation, you could say. There wasn't exactly an Afghanistan army that was going up against the coalition of the nonsense.
Of course.
So look, you have to say it was all just industry. They were going there just to take the opium and to go along with this absurd sort of a storyline that they're looking for Osama bin Laden in a cave. Am I right?
Although he was actually living right next door to America's close ally, Pakistan's main military base all along. I've got to just differ one little bit.
Right.
The poor bloody infantry that went there to fight are, of course, also victims of this. They were told that they were going for honor and freedom and so on. The rascals are elsewhere. They're not in the trenches, Jimmy.
Yeah. Well, look, I think this goes back to 9/11, George, and the fact that the Twin Towers went down and this whole sort of Osama bin Laden boogeyman myth has just sort of been part of the narrative for how long?
I don't think it's a myth, you see. I think Osama...
You don't think that he was a CIA operative?
I don't. I believe the CIA backed him in his fight against the Soviet army in Afghanistan. Of course, that's a matter of...
And on 9/11, his family got blown out of the United States.
That's a matter of fact. His estranged family...
and connections with the Bush family.
His estranged family were deeply connected to the Bush family. But that doesn't mean that bin Laden was not a highly dangerous terrorist leader who slaughtered a lot of innocent people. In New York, in Nairobi, in Dar es Salaam, in different parts of the world, and even after his death are slaughtering people now in different parts of the world. The hour is late, Jimmy. Come back next week and we'll continue this argument. I've got to listen to Stuart in Scotland first. Go ahead, Stuart.
Hiya, George.
Hi.
How's it doing? It's an honour to speak to you.
Thank you so much, sir.
How you doing? I've actually got a wee bit of a question because me and my dad talk about a lot of politics, and my question is, do you think there's a higher global organisation that pulls on the strings of Western countries to continually make bad decisions and chip away at our freedoms, slowly but surely tightening the noose? The media is acting like these inhuman monsters are normal. The BBC being the biggest supporter of pushing a certain narrative. I can't believe that these politicians continually make fools of themselves out of their own stupidity.
Well, I do, unfortunately, Stuart. This is an interesting topic. We will have to continue it because it's almost the end of the show. But unfortunately, I know that they are more than capable of making fools of themselves because I spent nearly 30 years up close and personal to them. The people who run our country are not James Bonds, they're Mr. Beans, they are Johnny English, they are Austin Powers. Trust me on that. And as to an organisation somewhere that is coordinating all of this, how I wish that that was true, because all we'd have to do is find out which cave they were meeting in and, well, roll a boulder across the front of it and leave them there. So I wish that were true. But I don't believe that it is. But we will come back to it, I promise. But I've got to take the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Not much time.
No.
2 quick points. Julian Assange, I despair, really, and I think it's disgusting, his treatment now. And Richard Medhurst, and you said no justice. Now, what we need, says me, is a peaceful protest right across our country soon, and with you and all the other dignitaries leading it, not just a little thing in Piccadilly. What do you think to that?
Well, they won't do it.
We could organise it.
But they won't do it. They won't come. Nobody in Parliament is standing up for Julian Assange. Nobody with any power is defending Julian Assange. It's left to people with no power. Like me, like the Honourable Craig Murray, like the young man I had on the show earlier. If we called a peaceful protest, it would be only the people that are in Piccadilly Circus that would turn up, Norma.
No, I reckon people right across the country would, and we just show them because it's our right to do it, George.
Well, I wish, but I don't believe that that's true. Last word to you, Norma, because we're running out.
Quick. Yeah, I know. Quickly, guns. They fire them for royal salutes, and I don't like this tradition. I don't think it should continue.
He was a military man.
Yes, he was, but we have it for all sorts of celebrations and events. I actually think, I don't like guns, and I think that perhaps if Big Ben or some church bells would be much better, and it needs to be reformed because Guns are not the sort of thing that I like, even if he was a military man. Guns are there just to kill people, and I hate it. I know it's defence, but I don't like it.
Well, that's a powerful and entirely legitimate point of view. I like a 21-gun salute myself. Depends the purpose in which it's being done. It's been marvellous. Thanks for joining me.